Now, if you don't mind, let's talk a bit more about how you organize and construct your applications. So in the last episode, we did a full review of mailable classes, how you're going to send email to your users. Now, in this case, we fired off the email as part of the basic flow in creating a project. And honestly, I think in more cases than not, this is the way to go. It's simple, it's direct. When you return to it a year from now, you're not going to hunt through 10 different files to figure out at what point does an email get fired off. And there's a lot of benefit to that. But in other cases, you may find this growing and growing, and you're searching for some way to split things up. It just kind of depends upon the complexity of your project. So if that happens to be the case, I'm going to show you a couple choices that you might consider. Keyword being might. You might consider it, or you might just say, keep it in the controller, queue it up once you learn what that means, and we're good to go. And that's entirely fair. The first option is to leverage a eloquent model hook. So as it turns out, behind the scenes, Laravel will fire these little things called events. And we'll talk about that more in the next episode. But to be quick, an event it's an announcement. It's an announcement of something that took place. I often compare it to somebody picking up a bullhorn. Hey, anyone who cares, this thing happened, do what you wish, right? That's all an event is. Now, through the lifecycle for an eloquent model, for example, if you fetch an item, or you update an item, or you delete a record, a number of these events will be triggered, and you can see many of them here. So for example, if we wanted to hook into when a model is created, or in other words, when a project is inserted into the database, well, we could listen for that hook right there. So take a look at this. We're going to go to our project model, and we'll add this method here called boot, and it's actually a static function. Now, because we're overriding a method that's on the model class, I'm always going to make sure that I call the parent's boot method as well. And then I can do whatever I need to here. So we're going to say, we're going to listen for when this model is created. Take a look at this. We're using this helper method called created to quickly hook into that created event. And then we pass a closure here, an anonymous function. This code will be executed only after a new project has been created and inserted into the database. So that means if you want, here, you could fire off an email. Because if you've decided anytime a project is created, no matter what, I want to send an email to that person, well, you might consider doing this. So that means if we were to come back to our controller, we could take this code here. We no longer have need for that variable, so we could remove it. And then if I were to switch back, I can paste that new code here and let me import my mail class at the top. Next, I need to import the project created class as well. Okay, so now you've cleaned up your controller a little bit, and this should still work the way it did before. And let's prove it to ourselves. We will create a brand new project that will create the project and then fire off the email. And let's see, let me open up Telescope very quickly, come down to mail, and sure enough, just now, we fired off an email, the brand new project. So that is one way to go about this. So it's cool, you can do this, but you have to ask yourself, is this a win? So for example, yeah, the controller is a little easier. We're now focused on the core action. What is the core action of this endpoint? Well, we need to create a new project. Things like sending an email, you might consider to be a side effect. It's not the core thing we're doing, but as a side effect, we do want to make sure that we fire off an email. As a side effect, you may want to update some kind of stats or something like that, but they're not the core of what you're doing. The core is inserting a new project. Now, what about any downsides, if any at all? Well, I'd say, if you were to ask me, one downside is, yes, I can see I'm creating a project, but it's no longer crystal clear to me that as part of this process, I'm actually firing off an email as well. That reality has now been disguised just a little bit. And this is what it means to be a programmer, by the way. You're constantly sort of like on a seesaw. You want to clean things up, but then you don't want to walk too far to the other side where everything completely becomes out of alignment and you can't understand anything and there's so much misdirection. It's an issue. But then at the same time, you don't want to walk too far to the other side where it's simply nonstop procedural, legacy-looking code that will take you hours to parse. So for that Seesaw, try to keep it as balanced as possible. And that's a long process, by the way, that takes many years to feel out. Okay, but nonetheless, you now know how to hook into various model events. And you can even do things like, well, if you have a project and it's updated, then maybe I need to do something else. Or if it's deleted, then I need to, maybe I need to update a different table or something like that. So you do have a lot of flexibility here at the not so small price that you have introduced a bit of indirection, not to mention coupling. But nonetheless, I've done things just like this in my own code bases, so it is something to consider.